You mentioned vanity metrics, and you also discussed earlier, do streams and followers result in ticket sales? And I think, there's been kind of this, I've been studying what the live music landscape is looking like now post-pandemic. I think we can officially say post-pandemic now, not post-COVID, but post-pandemic. And, it was kind of this mad scramble where we thought that people were going to flood back into the clubs and the theaters and the arenas and everywhere because they were so desperate for live music again. I think the reality has shown that that's not actually the case. I think it's a combination of new buyer habits, customer habits that they kind of sunk into during the pandemic. They don't feel the need to go out as much, and that some of them are just not really inclined to go out as much as they used to go out, and they've found routines at home, which results in lower ticket sales, especially for these mid-level artists. And I've been hearing left and right of these Spotify darlings, these, artists that have tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of streams and monthly listeners on Spotify, can't sell 40 tickets at any stop on their tour. That is not a good look for the industry when there's that massive discrepancy between these metrics, these numbers on the internet to hard ticket sales. And I feel like that is almost it's this divide between internet artists and real life artists, and this divide between what is achievable in online, and then how can you translate that? But I feel like the onus is also there's a responsibility, and I think Spotify is realizing this. There's and Instagram and all the platforms that are basically building their platforms off of the work of creators and artists. There's some kind of responsibility to help the artists and creators build a career that they have now helped the platforms grow so much, and so Spotify is launching new tools every day to help artists and it help reach them, save from the one thing that we really need, which is let me message all of my followers right now and tell them about my tour. They don't do that, and I grilled them when they were on the show. Why aren't they doing that? Bandsintown does that. It's one click. It's literally message all of my fans in Minneapolis. Boom. Bandsintown sends it out. Thank you, Bandsintown. Why doesn't Spotify let me do that? That's insane and annoying and frustrating because, how are we supposed to get in touch with all of our fans and followers? But we've seen this time and time again. Facebook convinced us, 10 years ago, 12, 15 years ago, build up Facebook pages of all our fans. We did that. And then Facebook rips the rug out and is like, oh, guess what? Now, if you want to reach any of them, you have to pay us. And every platform is kind of like that because we forget at the end of the day, you rent your fans to social media. You own them if you get their email addresses or their phone numbers. There's a big difference there. And it's same with Spotify. It's yes, we're so obsessed with streaming numbers as an industry, and we, everybody's first check is oh, how many monthly listeners you got on Spotify? How many streams you got? All that stuff. And then, we'll go check out Instagram followers. But does that translate to real lifelong fans? Does that translate to tickets sold? People that are going to support you for life? They're going to spend, that's the true fans concept. Are they going to spend at least $100 a year on you for the rest of your career? Oftentimes, no. But then on the flip side, we see it the other way. We're seeing artists that are selling out tours, selling out clubs, theaters, whole shows, and their numbers are seemingly negligible. And so I often always encourage people to check yourself when you're judging somebody based on their vanity metrics, on their numbers, and really go to their show, look around at the fans, see how many people are in there. I could name 100 artists who you would probably scoff at their numbers on Spotify or Instagram, but they're selling out their shows. Now, what would you rather have is the question. Is this do you want ticket buying fans, or do you want Do you want the vanity metrics? Do you want, your Instagram looking cool, or your Spotify? Now, granted, with Spotify, you get paid for those streams. So yeah, that's money, and that helps as well. So I'm curious though, are you seeing kind of in the conversation of the people that you're talking to, specifically in the hip hop community, have those goals and intentions shifted? Like you mentioned, not everybody needs to get to 100. Maybe living at 60 is cool. That's a healthy career. I mean, there's artists right now that, who would not want to be an artist, a mid-level artist that can maybe sell 1,500 tickets wherever they go? That is a solid living. That is a serious fan base. But maybe you're only looking at 100,000 monthly listeners. Maybe you're looking at 50,000 monthly listeners. Maybe you're looking at 50,000 Instagram followers topped out, and it's like, where's the conversation right now? Have goals and intentions shifted? Have people woken up to the fact that vanity metrics you're not going to build a career on vanity metrics? I'm curious your thoughts on all that.
Yeah, we're starting to see that conversation happen more because we're starting to see more and more of that disconnect, right? You would have artists that would use metrics like first week album sales as a benchmark against each other, but even that isn't necessarily the best measure of who is going to these concerts or who's doing these things. Sure. In terms of the live performance piece, which is the first thing that you mentioned, I think I've seen a few trends there because the top line numbers we've seen is that Live Nation just had record revenue and that music is back, right? And while I think that's true, as we both know, for the top artists, like The Weeknd's, selling out arenas or stadiums at this point, it's the mid-level artists who are the ones that we're talking about that are much more affected by this. And I think this is important because we also saw this recent report. This is from Steve Cooper, the outgoing CEO from Warner, who had said that the label is less dependent on superstars than it was in the past. And I think that there's some nuance there because someone could take that and think that that means that, it's the time for the mid-level artists, but it's not quite that. What that means more so is that the definition of superstar is just changing a bit, where, let's say 30 years ago, it could be Michael Jackson, Queen, or whoever, or Madonna, and, the biggest artists of the 80s, Prince and others. But now there's probably 20 people who you could say across all genres who are at those levels on a global perspective. So those folks are still superstars selling out arenas and doing all those things, but they're just not at that like Beatlemania level that the industry was used to having before.
Right. And I think maybe to go along with his quote, what I think a lot of the major labels are looking at right now is it's not necessarily that they need the superstars to keep the label profitable and successful. It doesn't need to be artists to them. As we've been seeing catalog acquisitions, as we've been seeing labels snap up songs, just individual songs. Granted, they're signing the artist, but they're only signing it for the viral TikTok hit. Honestly, they don't care about the development of the artist. The artist doesn't know that. I wish they would. But like what you're saying, because previously, historically, the major label failure rate was 98%, meaning it's like they sign 100 acts and 98 of them this year are not going to recoup the cost of their advance to get a second album, and they're going to get dropped. Now it's interesting that it's not really to the label about which are my acts are going to be profitable, because whether they build a touring business or not is really of no concern to the major labels if they're not participating in touring revenue. If they haven't signed a 360 deal, which we're fortunately seeing less and less of, if the label's not participating in touring, they don't care about touring. So whether the artist becomes successful or not, they don't care about. They want to make sure that their money at the end of the year is in the black. And the way that they do that is they get enough hits. And the way that they get hits, it's not necessarily as much anymore about the artists that are the superstars that are pumping out consistent hits like Drake or The Weeknd or Michael Jackson. It's now they're just, that's why 2020 was the year of TikTok signees. It was like, 60% of every artist that got signed to a major label in 2020, and I think even 2021, was a TikTok hit. And it's like, I mean, I wish, like, every artist wants to think that they've made it when they get the major label deal. Vox, I think, did a really good piece on. They interviewed me for this, and spoke to a lot of great people about this, of what happens to songs after they go viral on TikTok, and they actually followed up with a lot of the songs that went viral in 2019 and 2020, and like, where are they now and what has happened now. But we're going to look back in 5 to 10 years from now. We're going to look back at this era and be like, wow, it's like the one-hit wonders we know from the 90s, It's like there's going to be the one-hit wonders of the TikTok era. It's like, oh, yeah, that song trended on TikTok for 2.5 weeks. They got a major label deal. They got $1 million, and then they flushed it all in 3 years, and they don't have a career to speak of.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
It's so fascinating because it also makes me think of this other point that you mentioned on just the power that the platforms have and how the platforms are more incentivized to have them as the star and not necessarily the artist. Yeah. And I think this is something that we've seen happen more and more. If you're someone that uses TikTok on a regular basis, this is how the app has been designed. That For You page is meant for passive scrolling. And who that post is from is in a much smaller font than anything else, right? We're done with the days where Instagram would have that banner up top for who did a post. Of course, it still has that. But if we're thinking about how stories is the main way that people are consuming content on these platforms, and it's Reels. The video itself, right? You see this video, you go to the next one, and Instagram has essentially done the same thing with Reels. So this is now just tapping into this way where the platforms understand that they are the place, they are the destination. So it's harder for the artists themselves to really be able to build that deeper connection. So that's where it becomes even more likely that the people that are liking and engaging on each thing may not actually know as much about you as someone else that could be on a particularly different platform. So it's kind of this thing where, as much as a lot of the mega platforms do have a lot of the power, and I think part of the reason they've grown is because they've made themselves a destination and they've done it that way. A lot of the other platforms that are a bit more built towards trying to cater to artists and having them connect with their fans more deeply, they aren't as big as a lot of the other platforms are. I'm thinking about platforms like an Audio Mac or like a Tidal or even a SoundCloud. They've all had initiatives in place to be able to connect artists with fans, or to be, whether it's your fan powered or music centric royalties, or Audio Mac has their badges. And these things are great, but I do think that these things hit more of the audiences for a lot of the artists that we're talking about, which is great. But maybe that's part of where that separation is, right? If you're an artist that does look like for you on one of those platforms, and maybe it's more about what your audience can have there, and who cares what the stats look like for your monthly listeners on Apple Music or Spotify or somewhere like that.
Totally. And it's interesting. It's like I'm having this epiphany here of kind of how the major labels are looking at what their new intentions are, their new business model, I should say, in terms of not necessarily looking for the next superstar as much as they need to, as much as like, let's just get enough hits, singular hits, and it doesn't need to be by the same artist. It's not like we need to sign Drake that's going to be good for 15 hits over the next, 6 years or whatever. They can just grab up any single. TikTok has a similar model. We don't need the superstar creators. We don't need those influencers that have the tens of millions of followers, because it's not necessarily as much on this platform, on TikTok, about your followers. It's about how do you keep people on the platform long enough. And TikTok is structured in a way that half the time on your For You page, more than half the time, you're not seeing content from people you follow. You're just seeing content that TikTok thinks you're going to like. And so in one sense, you could say it's democratized a little bit more. But on the other sense, it's that creators are having a tougher time building a loyal following and an audience based on people who like their stuff, because the user behavior on TikTok is now just trained to scroll. It's not necessarily as much about following someone that you like their content or you think you're going to dive deep into an artist. And mind you, there is that too. And there's a subset of the community, but that's not how TikTok has been built. Like you said, that's the biggest difference, I think, between TikTok and Instagram. Instagram is for your followers. It was built on you build up a following and your followers will see your content and your followers will only see the content from people that they follow. But TikTok is the complete opposite. And there's this parallel right now with, I think, the major label business model with also the TikTok model. And it's just like, to be profitable and have a successful business, it's not that they need the superstars anymore. It's that, on TikTok model, how are you going to keep people on platform? And they've realized that it doesn't matter if you have 5 followers or 5 million followers, your content that you post may help TikTok keep somebody on the platform. That's why we see somebody who just starts an account on TikTok and their second post gets 100,000 views because they're like, you know what, we're going to test this out. And good job. You just, you posted something that is going to keep our audience engaged. We don't care about the number of followers you have.
Right. And they got it down to a science just with being able to give you that initial dopamine rush, right? It's encouraging. You see that you want more of it because we all know what it's like to post on platforms where you don't get engagement. That's how things drop off. They give you just enough in the early days to get you intrigued, and then things do start to trickle off a bit there.
Yeah. Totally. TikTok would never say this, but there have been studies that have shown, they prioritize people's first few posts when they newly create a TikTok account to get you hooked. And then they kind of taper that off and now you're it's like a drug. And now you're chasing that high again. It's like, it's like you're never going to get that first high or you're going to you keep trying to get that high again. And it's harder and harder and harder. And TikTok's built that way. All the platforms, are built that way. And, like you said before, how kind of the majors, they're having to restructure their business model because at this point, they have about 65% of the market. That means 35% of the market are independent artists, indie labels, self-release artists. The majors have to innovate. They have to change their business model because they're losing market share year over year. And that is terrifying to them. Now, granted, they're all still profitable, but it's like 20 years ago, they had 95%, 92% of the market, and now they're at 65% because the indies have come in and, the indie label, self-release artists, all of that. So they still have the infrastructure, they still have the money, they still have the resources to help launch an artist from 60 to 100. But like you said, they're not looking at the artists that are developing really. And it's like, I think every artist needs to think about this if they do, one, if they're looking for a deal, but more so too, if they are offered a deal, it's like, okay, realistically, am I worth this deal? Like, let's set your ego aside. Let's just look at the numbers here. It's like, okay, you're talented. Cool. Everyone's talented. Like unless you are the next Adele or Michael Jackson or whatever, it's like, all right, let's be real here. It's not about talent. The label is not looking at talent here. They don't look at talent. They're looking at numbers. So are they signing you because you had one viral moment on TikTok? And are they just wanting that song? Or have you developed and built up an audience on your own that is so undeniable and they will follow you wherever you go that you can go in with this clout and the label needs you more than you need the label? And then if you can go into those meetings with that, then you're unstoppable. Then you can dictate the terms where I want a licensing deal. You're not owning my masters. We're going to do a 50-50 split, which the majors are doing now. They weren't doing this 5 years ago, but they are doing it now.